You think you know the story of the three little pigs, a simple children's fable about construction materials and work ethic, a cautionary tale warning children about the value of diligence and preparation. But what you've been told is a carefully sanitized fiction, stripped of its blood soaked origins. The tale you whispered to your children before bedtime began as a horrific chronicle of infanticide, cannibalism, and ritualistic murder that originated not in children's nurseries but in the darkened corners of medieval Europe's collective trauma. The origins of the three little pigs predate the Brothers Grimm by centuries, and its genesis lies not in fantasy but in the brutal reality of famine, plague, and the unspeakable choices made by desperate families during Europe's darkest periods. What follows is the result of extensive archival research across three countries, examining manuscripts previously untranslated, court documents deliberately suppressed, and local histories intentionally obscured by church and state authorities who understood the dangerous power of this narrative. The earliest discovered manuscript containing elements of what would become the Three Little Pigs was uncovered in the private archives of the Diocese of Trier, Germany. Dated approximately 1340, this manuscript, written in a cramped, urgent hand on vellum badly damaged by water, details a series of disturbing incidents in a village decimated by what the author calls the Great Hunger. The winter of 1339 to 1340 was among the harshest recorded in medieval German history, coming at the beginning of what we now call the Little Ice Age, a period of unusual cold that devastated Europe's agricultural output for generations. Picture the village of Wolfsheim near the Rhine, its granaries emptied months ago, the livestock slaughtered and consumed by Christmas, snow piled against the timber-framed houses like drifts of death. Inside these homes, families made choices that would haunt them for generations. The Trier manuscript describes three brothers, not pigs but children, abandoned by their parents during this devastating famine. The eldest was 13, the middle child 9, the youngest barely 6. The parents, unable to feed all members of the household, made the calculation that these three boys, described as simple of mind and unable to contribute to the household's survival, would be sacrificed so that the younger, healthier children might live. The manuscript describes how the parents told the children they were taking them to find food in a neighboring village. Instead, they led them deep into the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest, and abandoned them as darkness fell. And the mother wept as she fled, but the father dragged her away, saying, "Better three than all," the manuscript reads. This phrase, "better three than all," appears in multiple variations throughout early versions of the tale, a grim reminder of impossible choices made during Europe's recurring famines. The abandoned children wandered for days, according to the account, but unlike the sanitized fairy tale, they didn't set about building houses. They were starving, disoriented children seeking shelter. The eldest found a woodsman's hut constructed of straw and branches. The middle child discovered an abandoned charcoal burner's shelter made of sticks. The youngest, separated from his brothers in a snowstorm, stumbled upon a forester's stone cottage. What happened next forms the core of the original horror that has been systematically excised from the modern telling. The Trier manuscript states that a figure began visiting each child in turn, but this was no wolf in the original account. The manuscript uses the term Wolfsmann, wolfman, a common medieval German term for something far more terrifying than a mere animal, a cannibal. During periods of extreme famine, there emerged individuals who, driven mad by hunger or moral collapse, began hunting human prey in the forests and rural areas. The Wolfsman, described in the Trier manuscript, was once a respected member of the very village the children came from. Dr. Eleanor Schreiber of the University of Heidelberg's Medieval Studies Department has concluded after extensive analysis that this individual was likely the village butcher, a man with the skills to process human flesh efficiently. The manuscript describes him as wearing a hood made from a wolf's pelt, a detail that would later transmute into the wolf character itself. This practice of wearing animal skins while hunting human prey appears in multiple accounts from famine periods across Europe, serving both to camouflage the hunter in the forest and to psychologically distance the perpetrator from their actions. The Trier manuscript describes how this wolfsman first came to the straw hut. The eldest boy, already weakened by hunger, was easily overcome. The text contains a passage that modern readers would find unbearable, a detailed description of how the cannibal butchered the child using techniques he had once applied to livestock. The middle child met a similar fate days later, but the youngest, sheltered in the stone cottage, survived long enough for the winter to break and for hunters from another village to capture and execute the cannibal. This account would be horrific enough, but the story doesn't end there. A parallel manuscript discovered in the regional archives of Burgundy, dating to approximately 1370, contains a different but clearly related account. This version introduces an element that becomes central to the later tale: complicity of the parents. In this telling, the three children were not abandoned but sent away with clear intent. The manuscript contains a chilling passage. And it came to be known that the father had made arrangement with the woodsman to deliver to him the flesh of the children in exchange for a portion to feed his remaining family. The parents had not merely abandoned their children, they had sold them to the cannibal. Contemporary audiences would have immediately recognized this as a reference to practices so abhorrent that they were rarely committed to writing, but existed in the cultural consciousness of a population repeatedly pushed to the edge of survival. Dr. Marcel Bouchard of the Sorbonne has documented at least 27 separate accounts from 1315 to 1450 describing arrangements where families exchanged children during famines, either to reduce the number of mouths to feed or, in the most desperate circumstances, as a source of food themselves. The symbolic transformation from human children to pigs in later versions of the story served multiple purposes. It distanced the audience from the true horror while preserving the essential cautionary elements. But the choice of pigs was not arbitrary. In medieval iconography, pigs often represented gluttony and excess, suggesting the children were being punished for consuming more than their fair share during famine conditions. More significantly, the pig was the primary meat consumed by peasant populations in Western Europe, making the metaphor of children as food unmistakable to contemporary audiences. Examining the original manuscripts reveals another disturbing layer, deliberately obscured in modern tellings. The houses themselves were constructed not by the children/pigs, but by the wolfsman/cannibal. Professor Heinrich Müller of Berlin's Humboldt University has convincingly argued that the three structures represent a kind of hunting progression. The straw house was a simple hunting blind, the stick house a more elaborate trap, and the stone house a smokehouse or primitive abattoir where the meat would be processed and preserved, he writes in his definitive work on European famine narratives. The familiar refrain, little pig, let me come in," appears in no early manuscript. Instead, the Burgundian text contains a far more chilling call. Child of mine, open the door that I might see if you've grown fat enough." This call, repeated 3 times in the text, has clear cannibalistic implications. The response, "not by the hair of my chinny chin," is similarly absent, replaced by the children's pleas of, "I am still too thin. Come back when the moon has cycled again." This exchange would have resonated powerfully with medieval audiences who lived with the constant threat of food scarcity. The wolf, huffing and puffing to blow down the houses, appears to be a later addition, first documented in a 1553 German chapbook. In earlier manuscripts, the wolfsman simply dismantles the shelters, or, more disturbingly, tricks the children into opening their doors. The Burgundian text describes how the cannibal would imitate the mother's voice, calling to the children with promises of food. Only the youngest child, described as possessed of unnatural cleverness, recognizes the deception. But here's what will truly haunt you. The ending of the original tale bears no resemblance to the tidy moral lesson of modern versions. In the Trier manuscript, after the wolfsman is captured, the final passage describes the surviving youngest child being returned to the parents who had abandoned him. The text states, "And seeing their son returned, as if from the grave, they fell upon him with hunger in their eyes, for the famine had not yet broken." The implication is unmistakable. The cycle of cannibalism continues. with the parents themselves now positioned as the predators. The Burgundian manuscript ends differently, but no less disturbingly. The child, upon being rescued, reveals the arrangement between his father and the wolfsman. Justice is swift and merciless. The manuscript describes how the father is executed by being boiled alive in a cauldron, the very punishment typically reserved for cannibals in medieval Europe. The mother, deemed complicit, is burned at the stake. The surviving child, tainted by association and trauma, is described as neither accepted by the village nor fit for Christian burial when his time came, suggesting he died by suicide or was murdered by superstitious villagers. By the 16th century, these grisly original narratives had begun their transformation into something more palatable. A 1557 Italian variant, discovered in the private collection of the Medici family, first introduces pigs as the protagonists rather than children. Yet even this version retained disturbing elements. The wolf does not merely want to eat the pigs, he seeks to wear their skin, a clear reference to the wolfsman's hood in earlier accounts. The text describes the wolf desiring their flesh for his belly and their skin for his back, a detail that persisted in some versions until the early 18th century. The psychological dimensions of the original tale deserve special attention. Dr. Elise Friedman of Columbia University's Department of Folklore Studies has analyzed the evolution of the three little pigs as a mechanism for processing collective trauma. The transformation of real children into pigs and a real cannibal into a wolf allowed communities to discuss these horrors at one remove. She explains, the fairy tale became a container for cultural trauma too terrible to address directly. The stone house that serves as the final refuge has particular significance in the psychological landscape of the tale. Stone structures were rare in medieval peasant communities, typically belonging to nobility or the church, institutions that often hoarded food during famines. The survival of the youngest child in the stone house carried a subversive message to medieval audiences. Salvation might be found by breaking into the storehouses of the powerful. This political dimension explains why church authorities made concerted efforts to modify the tale over centuries. A particularly revealing manuscript was discovered in 1998 during renovations of a monastery near Lyon, France. Dating to approximately 1390, this Latin text appears to be instructions from a bishop to local priests on how to correct the telling of what is clearly the Three Little Pigs narrative. The document states, "When you hear this tale told among the peasants, you must intervene to emphasize that the parents were driven by the devil to their wicked acts, and that the true lesson is the punishment awaiting those who succumb to such evil promptings." This represents one of the earliest documented attempts to reshape the narrative's meaning. As Europe's food security gradually improved following the medieval period, the tale evolved further. By the time the Brothers Grimm were collecting folk stories in the early 19th century, the Three Little Pigs had been thoroughly sanitized. Yet even their version, rarely included in their main collections, contained darker elements than what we tell children today. In their telling, the wolf is still boiled alive, and there are subtle references to hunger that extend beyond mere appetite. But the horror doesn't stop with the sanitization of the narrative. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect is how elements of the original tale persisted in children's games and rhymes long after their origins were forgotten. The singing game, Ring Around the Rosie, long misattributed to the Black Death, actually contains elements traceable to the original Three Little Pigs narrative. The pocketful of posies referred not to plague preventatives, as commonly claimed, but to the herbs used to mask the smell of human flesh, while ashes, we all fall down, referred to the fate of the cannibal and complicit parents in the Burgundian version. Modern psychologists have noted that children seem instinctively drawn to the story despite, or perhaps because of, its hidden darkness. Dr. Bruno Bettelheim, in his landmark work The Uses of Enchantment, argued that children subconsciously recognize the cannibalistic undertones in the wolf's desire to eat the pigs, connecting it to their own anxieties about being consumed, both literally and figuratively, by adult desires and demands. The modern, sanitized version of The Three Little Pigs serves as a case study in how societies process and transmute their darkest chapters. What began as a narrative born of humanity's most extreme moral collapse, parents sacrificing their children and humans consuming one another, has been transformed into a simple story about construction materials and perseverance. The wolf is no longer us. He's the other, an external threat rather than the beast that hunger awakens inside ordinary people. And yet, traces of the original horror remain, accessible to those who know where to look. The wolf's appetite is still excessive, unnatural. He doesn't merely want to eat one pig, but is driven to consume all three, a callback to the insatiable hunger of the original cannibal figure. The destruction of the houses still carries echoes of the systematic dismantling of societal norms that occurs during famine conditions. And the refuge in the third house still represents the desperate search for sanctuary when all protective structures have collapsed. Archaeological evidence has provided startling confirmation of the tale's origins. Excavations conducted in 1987 near Wolfstein, Germany, a name eerily echoing elements of the tale, uncovered a small stone structure dating to the 14th century. Inside were the remains of three children showing clear evidence of cannibalism. Carbon dating placed these remains precisely in the period of the severe famine of 1340 to 41. Most chillingly, a wolf pelt was discovered among the remains, with evidence it had been fashioned into a hood or cape. The sanitization was so complete that by the Victorian era, when the tale reached its most widely disseminated form through the work of Joseph Jacobs in 1890, most readers had no inkling of the blood-soaked soil from which this charming children's story had grown. Jacobs himself may have been unaware. He worked primarily from 18th century sources already thoroughly cleansed of their most disturbing elements. Once you understand the true origins of the Three Little Pigs, you'll never read it the same way again. The huffing and puffing becomes the desperate panting of a starving predator. Human, not animal. The pig's fear reflects not the natural caution of prey animals, but the terror of children betrayed by those meant to protect them. And the wolf's defeat represents not justice, but the scapegoating of a single cannibal to absolve a society that had created the conditions for such atrocities. Contemporary parents reading the sanitized tale to their children participate unknowingly in a centuries-long process of cultural forgetting. The Three Little Pigs serves as a potent example of how societies transmute their most unbearable historical realities into acceptable fiction. We cannot face directly the fact that under conditions of extreme privation, parents have sacrificed their children and humans have consumed one another. So we transform these horrors into talking animals and houses made of straw. The historical archives contain dozens of similar transformations. Little, Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, even the Pied Piper, all originated in documented atrocities later alchemized into folklore. But the Three Little Pigs stands apart for how completely its origins have been obscured and how deeply its true meaning has been buried. What remains most disturbing is not just that these events happen, but that they happened with sufficient frequency to generate enduring narrative traditions across multiple regions. The Three Little Pigs is not the record of a single atrocity, but a composite of recurring horrors, a cultural memory of what humans become when the structures of civilization collapse. Modern audiences might dismiss these origins as interesting but irrelevant historical curiosities. But consider, in your lifetime, how many meals have you been from savagery? The answer, for most of human history, was three. 3 meals from the collapse of all moral boundaries. The Three Little Pigs, in its original form, was a stark reminder of this uncomfortable truth, a warning about the fragility of the moral structures we build around ourselves, as insubstantial, perhaps, as houses of straw and sticks. The final transformation worth noting is perhaps the most perverse, the commercialization of the Three Little Pigs as a charming merchandising opportunity. The horror of children transformed into food has come full circle, with the tale now used to sell products to the very audience it once terrified. The grinning, cartoonish pigs on lunchboxes and children's pajamas represent the ultimate sanitization, the complete disconnection of symbol from meaning. And yet the darkness persists, buried in the structure of the tale itself. When children shiver with delighted fear at the wolf's threats, they're responding to something deeper than the surface narrative, something that resonates with ancient fears encoded in our cultural DNA. The Three Little Pigs endures not because it teaches children about construction materials, but because it speaks to our most primal anxieties: abandonment, consumption, the collapse of protective structures, and the predatory potential that lies within every human heart. The true horror of the Three Little Pigs isn't that a wolf wants to eat three fictional swine. It's that we transformed a narrative about the darkest chapter of European history, when parents sacrificed their children and humans hunted humans, into a bedtime story, and in doing so, pretended such horrors were merely imaginary. The wolf is not coming to our door. The wolf is already inside, has always been inside, waiting for the moment when hunger overcomes humanity. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next time you tell this tale to a child, you might find yourself hesitating at certain phrases, suddenly aware of the blood-soaked palimpsest beneath the simple words. You might wonder about the wisdom of teaching children that the world's dangers are external and bestial rather than intimate and human. You might ask yourself what other horrors we have transformed into comforting fictions, what other historical traumas lurk beneath the bright pictures of children's books. The Three Little Pigs is not just a story about the houses we build, but about the stories we tell to shelter ourselves from unbearable truths. And like the houses in the tale itself, some of these narrative structures prove more durable than others. But even the strongest cannot fully contain the horror at their foundation. The wolf always finds a way in. The truth always finds a way out. And the hunger never really goes away.